33 men get caved in while working in a mine a half a mile deep in the earth, and they're completely trapped there for more than 2 months. Temperatures are around 95 degrees Fahrenheit with a really high humidity to make it even worse. Again, trapped for more than 2 months. But first, if you enjoy stories about heroes and what they did in real life to make them heroes, go ahead and hit all the buttons, make sure you're subscribed and you've got on your notifications so you don't miss any future uploads. Now for today's heroes. On August 5th, 2010, in western South America, in the coastal country of Chile, 33 miners from the ages of 19 all the way up to age 63 were working deep inside a mountain in the Atacama Desert, which is the world's driest desert, where some areas of this desert have not seen a single drop of rain for more than 500 years. The location of this mine is about 500 miles north of Santiago, Chile. In the San José Mine, where these 33 workers were mining for things like copper and gold, as well as other minerals. The San José Mine was a complex network of shafts and tunnels with a number of levels and chambers. Some of these tunnels and these mine shafts went as deep as 2,600 feet deep in this mountain. And all throughout this mine, there were lots of elevators and conveyor belts that were designed to extract the ore from this mine. In the mine, they were using heavy machinery as well as explosives to knock off big chunks of rocks from the surrounding walls, and then to transport them out of this mine using these elevators and these conveyor belts. So as you can imagine, there are definitely elements of danger being in the belly of a mountain with explosives, blowing up part of the mountain around you. Especially in this particular mine, the San José Mine, which was over 100 years old and very well used. So just in general, there are lots of safety procedures put in place to help limit these dangers and to try to keep miners as safe as possible as they go about doing their work. But for the 12 or so years that were leading up to this day on August 5th of 2010, the owners of this particular mine, which was the San Esteban Mining Company, had a pretty long record of safety violations which resulted in several accidents, and from these accidents there were actually 8 people that lost their lives. And this was a known thing. The company faced lots of criticism because of it, even criticism coming from its own workers, and over the years they had to pay several fines for these violations. So on this day of August 5th, 2010, in the early afternoon, over 2,000 feet below the surface of the earth, a veteran miner named Jorge Galleguillos was hard at work with a fellow miner named Franklin Lobos. Franklin was driving an ore truck through the tunnels of this mine, and Jorge was his assistant. These two men, they drive this ore truck to a service area in the mine. They stop, they get out of the truck, and they start doing some work in this service area near where they parked the truck. Suddenly, they start to feel the ground beneath their feet start to shake violently like a strong earthquake. And the ground shaking is accompanied by a really loud, extremely loud, deafening sound, which sounded like a massive explosion which can be heard and felt throughout the entire mine. The air all around the miners, all of the miners that are in this mine, start to become filled with this thick cloud of dust and sediment, making it much more difficult to breathe as well as much more difficult to see. They could only see now a few feet in front of them. And this initial terrifying experience lasted for several minutes. After this deafening noise and the ground shaking stopped, Jorge and Franklin, they call out to each other to make sure that they're alive and they're okay. And once they got the confirmation that yes, they're okay, they answered each other, they realized that whatever just happened, it was an emergency and possibly life-threatening. So they located each other and they concluded that their only option was to head to this refuge area in the mine. Many mines, they have these special reinforced areas that are designed for miners to go to in case of an underground emergency. But getting to this refuge chamber was not going to be easy. Not only for Jorge and Franklin, but for all 33 miners that were down in this mine. So Jorge and Franklin, they start to make their way towards the direction of the refuge. They couldn't use the truck that they were just driving in because of blockage, lots of rocks coming down, so they had to go on foot. And it was extremely disorienting, only being able to see a few feet in front of them, not even really knowing what is up ahead of them until they get there, without any idea of any damage that's been done or even how safe their next step is. It's now very dark in this mine because this event knocked out the power in the mine, so until they reach the refuge, their headlamps, that's their only source of light. So they start making their way slowly and carefully towards this refuge, when suddenly Jorge pointed something out to Franklin that was a bit odd. Jorge thought he saw a white butterfly on one of the rocks where they were walking. Franklin, he quickly disagreed and said, "No, that's just white rock," pointing out the translucent properties of this milky quartz that shimmers in the light when light catches it. Then Jorge, he gets a closer look at it, and then he kind of nods his head as he realizes that Franklin is correct. This is white rock. It's not a butterfly, as he first thought he saw. So slowly but surely, Franklin and Jorge, they make it to the refuge, which was a journey that took about 3 hours before reaching the refuge, as the other miners eventually all make it to this refuge as well. It also took about 5 or 6 hours for this thick dust cloud to start to settle to the ground and make it easier to breathe and to see again. So once all the miners reached this underground shelter, they quickly realized that they were indeed trapped in this mine about a half a mile deep from the surface. They knew that their way out was now sealed by a giant rock that broke off from the mountain and fell into the mine. And this rock was massive. It was about 45 stories tall and weighed about 770,000 tons, twice the weight of the Empire State Building. And so as the miners, they all made it to the refuge, they were counted and their number was 33. The supervisor of these miners was a man named Luis Urzua. He was the big boss man on site. Luis also realized how dire the situation was as he was organizing groups to leave the refuge and to do some exploring to see if anyone could find a way to get out. Luis himself saw this massive rock that caved into this mine and trapped them off. And he stared at this flat, smooth stone that was blocking the way and thought it was like the stone that they put over Jesus' tomb. And so still, on the first day, as these 33 men were again in the refuge, the big boss man, Luis Urzua, he did something that were gonna help these men with their solidarity. He took off his white foreman's helmet and he announced to his workers, "We are all equal now. There are no bosses and employees." The refuge did have backup lighting even though it was still kinda dim, as well as having its own supply of air to ensure that they could breathe fresh air and not get built up with carbon dioxide. And very soon after this collapse, people that were on the outside, up above this mine, started a rescue operation. They were looking for a way to reach these trapped miners and looking for a way to get them out. So they were doing this at the same time that these trapped miners were going out in groups and also trying to find a way out. And pretty quickly, these groups of miners, they found this old abandoned shaft in this mine. And at first, it seemed like this abandoned shaft was gonna be the way to get these miners out. In fact, when the miners went into this shaft and the rescuers on top, they also found this shaft, the miners and the workers, they were able to get within 20 meters of each other, which is a little over 60 feet. So this is very close considering that these miners were trapped about 2,300 feet below the surface of the earth. So to get within 20 meters of these rescuers seems great. But remember these numerous safety violations that this company was known for? Well, there were no escape ladders that they could have used to get out through this shaft. And other escape routes, well, they were just left unfinished. So within the first 48 hours after the collapse, the rescuers, they were coming up with a plan to get these miners out through this abandoned shaft. But it still wasn't ready yet. So after discovering this shaft, but still not really having a way out yet, the miners left and they returned to the refuge 2,300 feet below the surface to wait. But unfortunately, as they were waiting, 2 days after the initial cave-in, so on August 7th, there was another landslide. And this second landslide messed everything up. It ended up completely blocking this shaft that they were gonna use to get these miners out, so it was no longer even an option. So with this second cave-in blocking the only path for a rescue, the Chilean government started to feel like all hope was gone to be able to get these miners out of this mine. I mean, at this point, there wasn't even a way to check on these miners to see if they even survived the second cave-in. There was no way to even communicate with them anymore. All communication was lost. Well, this wasn't good enough for the family members of these trapped miners. Almost immediately after the first cave-in on August 5th, the family members of the trapped miners started to gather together at the mine, the San José Mine, and they set up tents and shelters in order to be close to the rescue efforts. This camp quickly became known as Camp Hope. So when this second cave-in occurred on August 7th and the family members felt like the government was about to try to call off the rescue, because the rescuers at this point had no idea what else to do in order to get these guys out, well, this was not acceptable to all the family members that were in Camp Hope. So they started protesting very intensely. They were banging pots and pans as loud as they could in order to get attention, and they were shouting in the faces of police officers saying, "We want information." The president of Chile at the time, Sebastián Piñera, made several statements concerning the rescue efforts, and he reassured these family members that no efforts would be spared to bring these men to safety. And so, in the early morning hours of August 9th, so 2 days after the second cave-in, they started to use big mining drills to start drilling down into the mountain to try to reach the miners by drilling these boreholes that were a little over 6 inches in diameter. This was a slow and painstaking process, where it would take a couple of days to drill a single hole and then pull the drill out of that hole, and then start drilling a second hole after being unsuccessful with the first hole in order to reach the miners. Then after being unsuccessful with that hole, they pulled up the drill and then started drilling yet another hole. This went on for nearly 2 full weeks, and they had drilled 7 holes without reaching the trapped miners. All the while with no communication from these miners, not knowing what condition they're in, not knowing if they're dead or alive. Then around 6 o'clock in the morning on August 22nd, so 17 days after the first cave-in, they finished drilling the 8th hole, and then they pull up the drill just as they've done 7 times before. But this time, as they get the drill back up to the surface, they pull out the drill, and the rescue team notice a piece of paper that's wrapped around the drill. They take this piece of paper off of the drill, they look at it, and it's a note from the miners. And the note reads, "Estamos bien en el refugio, los 33, which translated means, "We are fine in the refuge, the 33. So 17 days after the first cave-in, the rescue workers were finally able to reach the trapped miners. And they finally get confirmation that all 33 men are alive and are relatively well. So you can imagine the excitement of this news. The rescue workers and the family members in Camp Hope, they erupt in cheers and tears, knowing that their loved ones are alive even though they've been trapped almost a half a mile below the surface of the earth for 17 days. President Piñera of Chile, he quickly gets on television and he shows off this note from the miners. A massive feeling of relief is felt throughout the entire country of Chile and even throughout the entire world, as by this point this is world news. It became a holiday in Chile where people took to the streets and they were celebrating, but this ordeal unfortunately is far from over, because the rescuers, they still have to figure out a way to get these trapped men out of this caved-in mine. So over a dozen entities from all around the world, including NASA from the United States, they join in the rescue efforts. While these entities were hard at work planning a way to get these guys out, there was at least a direct line of communication through this 8th hole to the miners. When the miners first got caved in and gathered in this refuge, they knew that they had to ration out the emergency supplies that were there, because there were definitely not enough supplies to last for weeks. There was really only enough to last for a couple days, maybe 3 days at the most. So each trapped man got 2 crackers and 1 spoonful of tuna fish per day, plus 1 or 2 ounces of milk, but they mainly drank industrial water that was actually not even meant for drinking, but it was meant to be used to cool off the mining equipment that they had down there. So they filtered this industrial water the best they could, and that's what they drank. And so by the time they were finally found on August 22nd, their food supply, it was gone. So the rescuers, they start sending food and water down this hole, as well as medical supplies. They also send a camera down this hole, and they got the first grainy images of these trapped men, some of them giving thumbs up signs. They also sent a fiber optic cable down this hole so they could set up a phone line, so they could at least set up regular communication with the miners to get updates on their needs and their conditions while they were waiting to be pulled out of the mine. There were letters that were regularly sent back and forth between family members through this hole as well. This of course gave everyone much needed emotional support and really helped to keep everyone's spirits up, which the trapped miners as well as their families in Camp Hope desperately needed. Because even though they were finally found after 17 days, they were still almost a half a mile underground, and these organizations that joined in the rescue still had to come up with a way to get them out. It would take an additional 52 days to plan how to get them out, design a rescue capsule, build a rescue capsule, drill a hole wide enough to fit the rescue capsule, and in this bigger hole, they needed to insert a metal tube in the top 100 meters, so about 330 feet, because in the top section of this hole, it was very crumbly, and there could easily be parts of the walls dislodging. Then you would have falling rocks that are falling down this hole as you're trying to pull these men out with the capsule. So this metal tube kept pressure against the walls of this hole, so nothing could crumble and get loose and fall down. Nobody really knew exactly how long it was going to take for these plans to be realized, but while down in the refuge, the miners, they would gather for a daily prayer, and up above in Camp Hope, they were having some religious ceremonies done as well. Also in Camp Hope, they had a stone where they wrote down all 33 names of the miners that were trapped below. The trapped miners also made their own set of dominoes so they could play at the table while they were in the refuge area. They had a little over a mile of distance in the mine shaft where they could get exercise. They often sang religious songs to help keep their spirits up. They even made a little casino down there so they could entertain themselves with casino games. Also having regular communication with their family, finally, that made it much easier for them to be stuck down there for so long. The capsule that was constructed for this rescue, called Phoenix, was both designed and built in a relatively short amount of time, and the first capsule was delivered to the site, to the mine, on September 25th for testing, so just over a month after the confirmation that the miners were still alive, when the note was found on the drill. A second and also a third capsule were built and delivered shortly after the first one to be used as backups, Phoenix 2 and Phoenix 3. Phoenix 1 was tested starting on September 25th, the day it was delivered. There was a lot of thought and engineering that went into this rescue. They went through lots of different drills in case of emergency, testing the communication system that was in the capsule, the ventilation system, the stabilization system, so the capsule wouldn't start spinning as they were pulling the miners up out of the hole. So a lot of rigorous testing to make sure that nothing went wrong during this rescue operation. So with all the testing complete, which was a lot more than what I even mentioned, the actual rescue operation began in the late night hours of October 12th, where a rescue worker was sent down this shaft in the Phoenix 2 capsule in a slow descent taking about 18 minutes to reach the miners. The order in which the miners were rescued was predetermined. They wanted the first group to be the most skilled and in the best physical condition. This way, if they did have any problems, they figured that these men that had the most skill and the best physical ability would be able to communicate clearly and do what they needed to do in order to fix the problem. Just after midnight, so now October 13th, 69 days after the first cave-in that happened on August 5th, the first trapped miner, named Florencio Avalos, was pulled successfully out of the mine in the rescue capsule. Everyone up above, the rescue workers, the family members in Camp Hope, started cheering and crying, and it was such an emotional time. Florencio was then quickly taken to a nearby field hospital that was set up to give the miners immediate treatment as they were pulled out of the mine. The capsule was then lowered down that hole again for the next miner to be pulled up. Now the rescue capsule was 21 inches in diameter. For reference, my shoulder width from shoulder to shoulder is 22 inches, so I would have to ride up in the capsule like this. It took about 40 minutes to lower the capsule, to get the guy in, and to pull him back out. So each round trip is about 40 minutes. And as they were pulling each worker up, the capsule was going up at about a rate of 1 meter per second. So one by one, it took about 22 hours to get all 33 men out. And as each trapped worker was pulled out of that mine, they each received an absolute hero's welcome. The cheers never got any quieter, the tears never got any less wet for all 33 men that was pulled out of that hole. At 9:56 p.m. on October 13th, the very last miner was pulled out of the mine. This man was none other than the miner's supervisor, Luis Urzua, the big boss man who took off his foreman's helmet on August 5th when they first got trapped and said, "We are all equal now, there are no more bosses and employees." There are certain details that we may never know about these men and what happened during their entrapment. The miners made an oath of silence to each other, probably to protect certain emotional issues that came up as they were trapped down there for so long, but they also made an oath to be there for each other and to support each other to the very end. And I believe they did just that. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I hope you enjoyed this story. As a tribute in the comments, just write the 33 or Los 33. And not to end on a sad note or anything, but the Chilean president at the time, Sebastián Piñera, well, this year in 2024, on February 6th, he unfortunately died in a freak helicopter accident. But he had a lot to do with these rescue efforts and deserves a lot of credit. Thank you once again for watching. I will see you on the next one.